I want to lead in with this vlog, with this Dungeons & Dragons vlog, by saying that there are many, many ways to enjoy and play Dungeons & Dragons. And in all of the vlogs that I push up from the perspective of a dungeon master, my number one rule, well, actually my second rule, my number one rule is every player has a voice at my table. Every player has a place, a spot at my table. Rule number two is I want you to enjoy and play D&D however you want. You want to make a power trip meta character? It's all good. Bring it. You want to play a flawed character or maybe something experimental? Let's see what we can do, because in celebrating all the different ways to play D&D, I want to empower my players as a dungeon master to really play, to really get behind the character that they want to play, because there's a synergy behind this. Now, yes, occasionally we play D&D with a one-off campaign or a one-shot game, one session or maybe 3 sessions, or I pull a classic module off the shelf. But most of my D&D sessions are weeks and weeks, or perhaps month and month in length. We're going to go from level 1, and we might top out level 15 or 16. So if we're going to be investing that literal real-life time, not to mention game time, I want you to be passionate about your character. I want you to get behind your character. I need you to do that, because that enthusiasm is going to spill over and into the narrative of the game, and we're going to get this synergy going back and forth. I say that to frame it because now we're going to ask the question from the perspective of playing a wizard or an arcane caster. Let's break it. Let's go into the meta. And if you ask me from that perspective, what kind of character do I fear as the DM? What kind of character, as I'm sitting behind the DM screen, do I take notice and say, okay, we could have some problems here. We could have some challenges here. Let's push that out. So in that framework, I won't say that I target specifically magic users, but this is kind of the big question: which is the most powerful class in Dungeons and Dragons? Well, that's multi-tiered, because it depends on the skill of the player, or I should say the direction that they want to take their character in. It depends on the campaign world. You know, Forgotten Realms is vastly different than Eberron, and it depends on the level of the characters. So there's a lot of factors in there, and layered over that, one of the things that I try to do, I say try because it's a little bit hard. The DM is a player too. Never forget that, or else you're going to burn out as a DM. I look not so much as like an overlord and I'm controlling the monsters in the encounter, but I look at it from the perspective of the monsters in the encounter. What is the intelligence level? What is the wisdom level of those monsters? And what are their experiences? Do they even know what a magic user is? If it's a hungry monster, it's probably going to lash out at whatever's closest or whatever looks weakest. If there's some sort of construct behind it or intelligence, it's going to know, okay, that human over there is not a magic user, but they have some sort of mojo, they've got some sort of powers going on, then maybe I want to target them. If we're talking intelligence, dragon intelligence, intelligence 2025 or Titan intelligence, they're going to be able to identify the magic user. They're going to know the spell level. They're going to have abilities to counter. They're going to deliberately, they're on the meta level that I am as the DM, they're deliberately going to target that magic user. So I say that from the perspective, there are times when I'm like, I need to take out that magic user, but I don't specifically target the wizard, the magic user, the arcane caster, because that's pushing in the meta. As a DM, I'm there to also play the narrative and play the monsters. So within that framework, if I have godlike intelligence, Fritz intelligence is like 11. So we're talking like DM, dragon, overlord, Titan intelligence of like 20. What am I looking at? Now, a lot of players focus on damage in Dungeons and Dragons, because look, we can strip away the role play and we can strip away the fun play. It's a game of dice. If we look at the DNA, if we look at the genesis of Dungeons and Dragons, it was a war game. It was a way to convert military units into wargaming aspects into player characters that each have a role, each have a class, into dice and fight them against monsters. Now, over time, it's evolved tremendously, but we've never gotten away from the basic dice system of Dungeons and Dragons. Do you hit? Well, sometimes you've got Thaco, sometimes you've got the opposite of Thaco. Sometimes things auto-hit. If you hit, how much damage is caused? You pick up a number of dice based on the spell, based on the weapon, based on the attack, and then there might be some modifiers on the other side like damage reduction, spell resistance to block it, and other innate ways of defending where you're immune to fire or you're immune to cold. You blast all that apart by just rolling as many damage dice as you can. We see this, and it's hard modifiers and soft modifiers, by the way. Soft modifier is an extra D6. I'm going to get an extra 1d6 damage, or think of a lower level rogue. I hit you with the short sword, 1d6. I've got sneak attack, so I add in 1d4, depending on the addition of D&D. That's extra dice is soft damage, because I can roll a 1 or I can roll legendary and roll a 4. Hard damage is automatically applied. A +1 sword does, longsword does 1d8 plus 1 extra point of damage. Those modifiers are a little bit more powerful because they're guaranteed. So if I'm rolling 46, I guess I could roll 4 1s. Probably not going to happen. I'm thinking, has it ever happened? Not in any of my games, but I'd like to have the hard, if I can, getting those +1s. Those are a little bit harder to come by in D&D because you got to pay the gold for it. But essentially, in looking at damage, and a lot of players focus on damage, and we need to focus on damage because it's just simple hit points, you want to stack the D6s. This is why those spells that level up, whether it's a lower level magic missile with 1d4s, or as they get higher, you stack on d6s, or it has a base attack. We see this sometimes with even some of the lower level spells. Shocking Grasp, 1d6. I'm thinking of D&D 3.5, 3.x, 1d6 plus 1 point for every level. So that caps off depending on the addition of D&D, but it's like 1d6 plus 8 or plus 10 or plus 12. That's a combination. So how much damage can you deal? How many dice can you stack in that dice tower, that dice pouch, that dice cup, and roll out? And Magic users do this because a lot of their spells, arcane spells, we'll put divine aside for a second, they stack, they grow, and they grow. This is what makes me a little bit more nervous as a DM. They grow in power as the wizard, necromancer, magic user, spellcaster grows. Fighters, not as much. Now, fighters are going to get some additional damage bonuses. You're going to pump up your attributes with strength, the base stats as you go. If you want to get belts of strength and gauntlets of ogre punching power and titan this and that, you got to pay hefty gold for that. That's a major investment. You've got your +1 sword. You want to upgrade that to a +1, plus 1d6 sonic or flaming. That's a pretty serious gold investment. Magic users, the spellbook variety, sorcerer variety is even less. Once you've got the spell, you've got the spell. You're good to go from that perspective. Even if you have a DM that charges you for spells, when you level up, you get a number of spells, and that kind of represents either the natural ability of the sorcerer, or it represents the out-of-game research ability of a magic user. Once you have Lightning Bolt, you've got Lightning Bolt, and it just grows with no investment. That makes it a little hard as a DM. Makes me a little nervous, because at least the gold that I give to the fighter, or the gold that the other party members earn, that gets traded in, that gets traded up. Those are in consumables. Arcane casters can stack that dice a lot higher and a lot faster. Now, on a side note, the acceleration of D&D, the current edition of D&D, we saw this pick up. It started in 3.0, 3.x, 3.5, but it really picked up pace in 4th. The power level's over the top. You're just not a bunch of regular adventurers that are going out and trying to quest in the land. No, you're all like demigods. It's like, Greek mythology, where you're just, as you level up, you become so powerful. I'm not casting judgment on that, but compare that. I'm not saying go play AD&D, but just look at some of the rules if you have a chance in AD&D from the perspective of a wizard called magic users or illusionists at the time. The experience points to level up were not all equal. To go to second level, a wizard needed 2,500 experience points, and a thief, prototype of the rogue or a thief acrobat, needed 1,200. On top of that, in AD&D, you had to buy your spells, and some of them were very, very rare and very, very pricey. So that was kind of the balance. It made things a little bit easier as a DM. That's just exploded off. So you want to have your damage dealing spells, and you want to have a variety of damage dealing spells. The second class of spells, and I can deal with the damage spells. I'm not happy. I'll do a little sad face, but I can deal with that with positioning or sending out some minions or trying to fight. Or at the very least, I can calculate in my mind, okay, they're casting this spell. It puts out this type of damage output. If they roll average, then my monster, my ogre, is going to last five rounds, assuming that the magic user can cast that or X number of rounds. I can at least make that calculation and adjust the tactics. What really messes me up as a DM, and look, we got to play it. It's in the rules. Spells that I call them interrupt spells, in that they interrupt my ability to control monsters. At the lower level, we see sleep. But at the higher levels, when we get into hold person, hold monster, you have the ability to effectively take my monster out of the game, and there's nothing that I can really do about it while that is in effect. The second layer, so it's essentially tactically interrupting. It's interrupting me. On a further level, what's really hard, charm type spells, dominate type spells, influence type spells. Those are even harder, because now you not only interrupt me and take my monster out of play, you switch sides on me. Now, depending on the edition of D&D, the current edition, they just become totally controllable. In other versions of D&D, there'd be some back and forth. It might resist. I'd have to role play a little bit, but still very, very potent, very, very powerful. What makes me nervous with that, stresses me, is that DM, from that perspective, if we're going in on the meta, is how an arcane caster, how a wizard, magic user, sorcerer is constructed if they have the ability to beef up that DC check, if they have the ability to bring down my saves. Now, the challenge here, of course, is you have to break through a number of gates. And what I mean by that is, first you have to have the spell ready and available. And you might not have it ready, or you might have already spent it. So you have to have the spell ready to go. Then, if there's any type of spell resistance or some sort of arcane resistance, we've got to break through that, depending on the edition before or after. But then I get some sort of save against it. And of course, some of the more magical monsters, some of the more powerful monsters, they're already going to have a great, depending on the spell, usually a will save, fortitude save, whatever it's going to be. Their saves are pretty good. But can I really count on that? That's the challenge. And if you are an unbuffed or not optimally built arcane caster, and you've got a hold person or two or hold monster, I'm not overly worried about it, because you don't have mathematically that average. You don't have enough spells to be able to reliably cast those and break through my save. I could roll poorly, but if I roll average or I roll higher, that's the balance in theory in D&D. But if I take certain feats, if I take certain specializations, if I have certain magic gear, if I have other types of spells ahead of time that I can cast, or I have sequencers ready to cast, you can buff that DC. You can bring down my saves. Well, now all of a sudden, if I roll average, it's not enough. I'm going to have to roll legendary. And the chances are I'm going to roll even lower, or it leaves me very vulnerable to a non-legendary type roll. And then that begins to take me out. We also see this shift. Now, I love lots of damage. I love lightning bolts. I love prismatic spells. I'm in for the big dice. There is something very satisfying about taking a pile of dice and casting them out on the table. But there is a switch depending on the level of D&D. Level 8, 10, somewhere around there, where the gains on damage, so you start to fight monsters that just have so many hit points. It's just out of control. And that's before we put in resistances and ways to potentially block spells. It's going to take you a while to chew through that. But if you have an optimized mage and you have ways to hold, dominate, charm, fascinate, sleep, prevent, and take me out of the initiative track, that's a problem. Because especially if you dedicate to that and you have spell slots to that or spells memorized for that, or, your sorcerer points for that, you could pop off, one a turn. You could pop off with certain builds, multiple spells a turn. That makes me very nervous as a DM, especially if it's my own caster or my own monster that has area effect or super type abilities. That's challenging. It's fun because then we get into a wizard duel. Nothing is better than a wizard duel, but that's what kind of makes me nervous behind the DM screen. That's what attracts my attention. And I think too many Magic users, wizards, arcane, focus on just the meta, the dice. It's important. Absolutely. Not denying it. But think about some of the other abilities. And again, this goes into if you want to play a super meta type arcane caster, that's okay. I'm not going to take it out on you. I do try to get behind the intelligence and the understanding and the experience of the monster. If it's a hungry mimic, it's just going to snack on whoever's closest. Usually it's the thief or the rogue. But if it is a dragon, if it is a titan, if it is a giant, if it is a beholder that's intimately familiar with magic and knows all that, if it is a lich, then just look, you don't want to be. Those are the times when the party looks at you funny for burning a feat in heavy armor and you're walking around like in plate. So this way, that monster thinks you're a fighter or thinks you're some sort of support and focuses on something else. I mean, all kidding aside, that's where certain opportunities come into play. There are times when you don't want to be an arcane caster.